Hello, amazing people. Welcome back to Just a Cup because you don't need an entire pot to get fired up. I am your host, Brian Fetzer, and this is the first episode of season 3 with another amazing conversation centered around mental performance, resilience, and the importance of taking care of the person behind the performance. And today's guest, super unique perspective, because he's experienced mental health from really nearly every angle. As a clinician, as a first responder, an entrepreneur, a coach, as someone who's personally worked through anxiety and depression and panic disorder, which hits home to so many people. Vin Infante, and he is a licensed master social worker, mental performance and executive coach, entrepreneur, speaker, and former fire department FDNY firefighter who served during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is absolutely a crazy time. And I couldn't even imagine doing first responder work during that time. Then, began working in mental health as a teenager, and I spent about 17 years serving people in hospitals, clinics, inpatient, outpatient programs, homeless shelters, schools, private practice. He's a licensed physiotherapist at 23, joined the fire department at 28, and moved into full-time entrepreneurship by 30. So you can see a lot of background, super impressive background. And I am super excited to get you on Just a Cup, Ben. It's definitely a pleasure. We've spoken a couple of times before, and now I get to dive deep into you and who you are.
Love it, man. That intro certainly wasn't a cup. It was the whole pot.
Yeah. Hey, I want to make sure people understand who we're talking to, because it's one of those things. I mean, sometimes, you get people on and some people think they might know somebody, but it's always good to give a little background and kind of hype it up a little bit.
Absolutely.
Before we talk about the work, working with the fire department, performance, who were you growing up? What's the best way to describe you?
The best way to describe me growing up was probably in two forms, right? Like the first form was a pretty happy kid, which was very quickly turned into a very anxious kid who was mostly a victim and got bullied for most of his life. That would probably describe the better switch, the two versions that existed.
So when we talked before, I mean, we're poor ambassadors for the real, which that's where we first met. And listening to your story when you were kind of talking to the guys on the call and everything, you talked really openly about being diagnosed with anxiety, depression, panic disorder. What was it that happened in your life when you kind of first realized that it was a little bit more than just, I'll call it, daily stresses?
I think as a younger kid, you don't realize that it's more than a daily stress. When I was middle school, I think was probably one of the most prominent moments where mental health was really non-existent. And so it was funny because, I mean, how old was I? Like, middle school is what? Like you're 11, 12, 13, right? And at that time, we were still in the early 2000s. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't really have more than the dial-up internet, right? And so you don't really know a lot about like mental health or these other things. And for me, especially, I didn't. And I was getting bullied a lot. There were times I got thrown down the steps. I would get in trouble for other kids bullying me because, they would have their friends give expert testimonies that I was the problem, right? And so it was really, really difficult. And I didn't understand what was going on. I would frequently go to the nurse and, have her call my mom because I was sick. I would be throwing up. I'd have some really bad, stomach issues, a lot of bowel issues, right? And I wasn't able to really function a lot of days in school. And it was funny because I remember, my mom would pick me up. She'd come from work. She'd get called out of her class. My mom was a teacher, and she'd have to come get me, and then she'd bring me home, and then she'd drop me off to go back to work. And after a certain period of time, she said to me once, and I'll never forget it. She's like, every time you're home, you seem fine, but you keep calling me from school because you're not feeling well. Are you faking? because she couldn't make sense of it. And to be fair, I couldn't either. I'm an 11-year-old kid or 12-year-old kid who doesn't know what's going on, just knows that I'm always in pain and my stomach always hurts and I'm throwing up constantly and going to the bathroom and I can't get out of the bathroom. And, obviously as I've gotten older, I've reflected on that. I'm like, oh, wow, that was high levels of anxiety from fear of my environment, from not being able to stay there. And my body was physically getting me sick because I just couldn't stand the thought of being in school. And it wasn't because of the fact that I didn't want to do homework or schoolwork or anything like that. It was because I just couldn't take the constant bullying that was going on, And I think that was probably like my first real brush with it, but I didn't know it. I didn't understand it. I did always know, though, that I was always looking for someone to talk to. I was always in and out of guidance counselor offices. I didn't really have a real therapist until I was in high school. There was never really a time where I guess I fundamentally was aware of my mental health until I probably became like a later teenager when I was, 17, 18, and I started really getting into therapy. So that was probably the first time, but I have been struggling with mental health ever since I was in, elementary school. I was getting picked on and bullied.
Wow. I mean, you can really say that. I mean, you've sat on both sides of the chair, right? What you do now and then from past. How is that kind of shaped, how you change the way maybe you listen to people? I mean, does that shape that at all?
I believe that everyone is capable of changing. When I think about how does it shape me in listening to people, I like to look at myself as a behavioral specialist because that's essentially what I am, right? My background in psychology and my training to be a psychotherapist is really my desire to understand what patterns go on in people's lives. I was struggling with patterns that I was unaware of. And that's why things were so difficult for me. And that's why everybody struggles. Nobody's struggling with something that they have a handle on, right? The things that we struggle with are the things we either don't understand or the things that we don't have a habit built around to change. Like you can't change a behavior without challenging it. You can't change a behavior without creating a new behavior. And all of that can't come if you don't even understand it. So there's a few parts to that. And so when I'm listening to people, I'm listening to them, but I am actively searching too. And I think that's what makes a good therapist or a good coach is you can't just take everything at face value. And you have to be able to put together missing pieces of puzzles that people don't even realize are missing. I think about it in terms like this. I have a 4-year-old daughter and she'll play with a puzzle. And let's say the puzzle is supposed to have 50 pieces and only has 48. She won't realize that there's 48 pieces until she gets to that final 2. But what I like to do is saying, well, can I see the missing pieces of the puzzle and maybe help with finding these things to get a complete picture? Because people aren't always aware until they get to the point that there's something missing.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's such an intriguing way to look at it. And just now my mind just starts going to like in 5 million different areas. So, I mean, your journey, took you from the clinical mental health setting into the fire department and eventually into now entrepreneurship. We were talking right before we started the show about your new company. And, those may look different when I talk about the fire department and an entrepreneurship. May look completely different worlds, but every one of them involves, people operating around pressure. And, Dr. Chappelle, good friend and business partner, talks about, a lot of times athletes don't understand what real pressure is, but military, police, fire department, that's pressure because you're jumping into it. When I say the word resilience, because it's used in everyday talk, right? From your clinical and your personal experiences, what does like a healthy resilience look like for you?
Healthy resilience looks like, I mean, we could even go with like I agree with the classic definition of it, which is the ability to bounce back. And, you see that in many different scenarios. If you're a first responder, you'll see it when you go and, for me, one moment that I hold on to, because it was probably one of the more significant ones, was we showed up to a EMS call, and the woman answered the door when we got there, and she was like, "I'm having trouble breathing." Like, she was talking to us, she was fully cognizant, and then she's starting to feel faint, and then we like sit her down, and then she eventually lays down, and she's holding my hand while people are checking her vitals, and then she slowly, just as she's staring at me, is just closing her eyes as I'm looking at her, and then like just out, like loses her heartbeat, loses everything. Then everybody's starting to work on her. They get the defibrillator out. Her 15-year-old daughter's screaming in the background about her mom, and
Wow.
that's something that it's not the most gruesome scene that some people have experienced, right? Like, I hadn't experienced anything extremely gruesome, like people being beheaded or whatever. I was pretty fortunate. But I feel like there's something that's interesting about that situation too. You're literally watching somebody who seemed fine just fade while you hold their hand. And that,
Right.
that was a moment that was a very interesting one. But then the question is, what do you do as you bounce back from that? And do you bounce back from that? And for me, I took it as, I think resilience comes down to how you define these things too. I'm not saying there's any level of like, I feel fortunate. It does, however, create a level of time is so precious. You have to be present with it. You have to enjoy it. You have to really make sure that you care about your loved ones and you show it. And it creates a new feeling, right? So I think resilience comes into the definitions of the moments that could harm us and how we then come back from those moments with a shifted perspective or experience for life.
I mean, serving in the fire department itself is intense position to be in, but then being in New York City and then doing it during COVID, which was a whole nother ball game. What experience? I mean, was there experiences that touch about fear, uncertainty, but then teamwork and the way people respond to pressure that you could think of as a story from that time period?
I think the biggest thing about the fire department is that they train everybody to operate the same. And the reason that they do that is because a lot of pressure tends to go away when you make things habitual. So they really emphasize, even if you're not like busy, right? If you're not out on runs, drill around the house, like the firehouse, right? Drill around the house basically means continue the things that you did in the academy. Practice tying your knots, because you never know. Like, that's one of the biggest problems most people hit. The guy that dies because he can't properly tie the knot to, rappel down off the burning building is the guy that didn't get the proper muscle memory, and his heightened emotional state was too high for him to really focus at the level he would have needed to get that done, because he didn't practice it enough for it to really be muscle memory. And, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that that's general, that's for every scenario, because sometimes even the guys that have good memory can still have a problem or an accident or pass away. But that is one of the biggest things that they drill into us. They say your chances of survival significantly go up if you can just do it without thinking. And so that was one of the biggest things. They always taught you, don't be idle. There's always something to do. Could be practicing your drills, could be getting more familiar with your equipment, could be, just doing things around the firehouse, projects to keep you busy, make the house better, pour into the house, like treat it like your home. Everybody should share responsibility and do everything together. And the fire department had a really, really good way of making you want to be a part of the culture. They had this way of teaching you how to be one, but FDNY is also run kind of like a paramilitary organization. So, you get your identity stripped down, you shave your head, you go through the training, you get yelled at by drill instructors, like the whole nine. And there is something in that too, because when you have experiences like that, it creates a bond that most people can never understand, because of the fact that you've experienced something most people never experience. And things like that are actually very powerful in creating connection. So, one of my goals for 2027 is to host my first men's retreat. And the thought is, and I was talking about this with a guy I'm potentially going to co-host with, I said, I want one day to be really hard. Like, I want one day for all the guys there to be one of the hardest things they've did, whether it's a grueling hike or some crazy activity, because at the end of that day, they're going to be exhausted, but they're going to know they did it together. And that, I believe, is going to be the core of what creates lasting connections in the men's retreat. Because if we don't give these guys something hard to do, and it's not, it's just educational or feel your stuff, I don't think anybody's going to leave there feeling like they have a brother for life, but they will have a brother for life if they have to scale rocks together. Because I know that that's how that goes. I know that there is a deep connection in bonding through adversity.
Okay, I'm just talking about really discomfort. And when you think about mental health or, a concern, that line between pushing through discomfort and ignoring it, do you think that would kind of help shape that a little bit or learn it a little bit more, potentially?
I think that sometimes it is both. There were definitely drills in the academy where like my whole body was in pain and you needed to push through it. And the thing is if you understand, the Navy SEALs have a rule, right? It's called the 40% rule or the 60% rule. I can't remember the exact name, but the whole research and the backing behind it is that when your body wants to quit, it's only at 40% of its capacity. And so how do you start training yourself to unlock the deepest, most powerful versions of yourself? You don't, if you quit every time your body tells you to quit. You have to learn to go deeper. You have to learn to go stronger, and you have to learn to honestly tell your mind to shut up sometimes, because I think too often what we do is we think like, we're probably going to go really deep here. I don't know if your listeners are going to tune out at this point, but here's the thing, right? You're not your thoughts. And because you're not your thoughts, the thought that immediately comes in and says, you need to quit, it's too difficult, or it hurts. That's not you saying that. That's not coming from your soul. That's coming from something else in you, something that wants you to quit, something that isn't reaching its potential. And don't get me wrong, there is fine lines, right? That's why these things have to be nuanced, because it's not to say like go out there and kill yourself because you go so hard. It's about understanding that there are levels to this stuff, that you are more powerful than you're even aware of. And you have to discern, is it a moment that you're giving up before you even hit your limit? Or is it a moment where you really should consider, hey, I'm like burning on all cylinders here. I'm at my limit. Maybe I should take a break. But you can only discern that if you've pushed through enough to understand, where you're at. And most people never do. Most people never push through hard stuff.
I had to write that down. You're not your thoughts. That's a pretty deep, but very easily understood, I think, statement, because we get in our own minds so much. And I mean, how many times if somebody has talked themselves out of something or, brought a lot of fear to themselves when it was completely unneeded, because there was nothing to fear, but that old adage, nothing to fear but fear itself, because it's really not there. When it kind of shifting on that, but really kind of staying on that from somebody that's a high achiever, right? And I would obviously think say that you are one of those. But if you're talking about like successful athletes or executives or entrepreneurs, that they may be performing well but kind of deteriorating inside, what are some signs that you could see, or you might be a recognizable part that somebody might be showing that face, but inside it's awful?
The biggest thing that I've seen through a lot of the clients that I've worked with is that your average high achiever is a high achiever because they don't feel good enough. And they are attempting to do or build something so that they can prove to the world that they are worthy of whatever it is that they want. But the problem with that is that you don't need to prove it to the world. You need to prove it to yourself. And so a lot of the things that they wind up doing become, I don't want to say misaligned, because it's not always misaligned, but there is a level of lack of connection, or there is a level of it doesn't always feel fulfilling. I have a client, for instance, who built his business, slept in his car for a couple of years while he was doing it, This year, you know, they hit a big number. They got valued at $200 million. And, you know, he's getting paid an okay amount as a co-founder of this company. And he's taken vacation for like the first time in 5-6 years. And his investors are like, you shouldn't be posting that you're on vacation. Why? You need to be showing that you're working. Like, we don't want to see that you're posting on vacation. It looks like you're showing off. It looks like, you know, you got work to do. You shouldn't be showing people that you're doing things that, you know, and he was actually a little bit taken back. He's like, did I do something wrong? Like, I knew I probably should have been working. I'm like, no. What do you mean you should have been working? Dude, you've been working your ass off. Your company got valued at 200 million. You took your first vacation in years, and people have so much crap to say. And, you know, what's really funny, though, is it continued to kind of hit on that thing we've been working on, which is, don't worry about this feeling that you're not good enough to do the things you want to do. Like, you can and are. And so I see that a lot of these high performers will constantly do things that maybe don't feel good because they're still trying to hit this metric of making themselves feel like they are capable. And that can manifest in a lot of different ways. Saying yes to a trip they don't have to be on because they're afraid to say no. Constantly being overly on their phone or available by always answering an investor call at any second or an email at any second, working till midnight, neglecting their wives and their kids and their families. You know, I think the number is like 1 in 4 entrepreneurs end up divorced. You know, 79% of entrepreneurs and founders can have if they were to go in and clinically talk to a therapist, can get diagnosed from a mental health issue, like a significant one. And we see that a lot of these issues, or at least I see, are present because there is this overcompensation for the fact that they don't feel like they're worthy or capable or good enough. And so switching that is one of the most important thing any high achiever needs to learn. And it's not about losing your edge. Because a big concern that I hear when I say this stuff to them is like, well, Vin, what if I lose my edge, right? Like, if I feel good about myself and my life, am I still going to want to achieve as greatly? Am I still going to want to build the company as big or be the best player I could be in the team and do this and do that? And I'm like, of course, because the truth is, think of it as if you're fueling up a car. If you put regular gas in a BMW, it's not going to run as well. It will still run, but you're going to run out of fuel a lot quicker. The car is going to break down faster, and it's not going to be a great ride while you're doing it. But if you were to put 93 or whatever the hell premium is in other states, if you put that in the car, it's going to run better. It's going to run longer. It'll be more sustained, and you'll enjoy the ride. And so the biggest thing is, it's not about losing your edge. It's just about switching the fuel you're running on as a high performer.
Right. Wow. I love it. Hey, let's take a quick time out to recognize our sponsor, which is Iron Faith Nutrition. Iron Faith Nutrition, a family-based company and faith-based company that has been creating high-quality nutritional products since 2018. The lineup includes over 50 products designed to support everyday wellness, energy, recovery, gut health, joint health. It goes on and on. Some of those popular products are curcumazyme. It's got a vitamin plus herbs, liquid multivitamin, SC herbal tea, detox tree, and just started carrying Agape Energy, which is a Christian-based energy drink. You can learn more about Iron Faith Nutrition either at ironfaithnutrition.com, all spelled out, IronFaithNutrition.com. Or you can hit the QR code that's kind of up in the corner. And as always, hey, supplements are designed to support a healthy lifestyle, not supposed to be a replacement. You speak to your healthcare professional if you have any questions and find out what's appropriate for you. Hey, wanted to keep this conversation about mental performance and just kind of keep diving deeper in with Vin. Vin, first off, where can somebody find out more about you and get a hold of you?
Best space to get a hold of me is if you wanted to book a call directly, you could go to my website and click that button for a strategy session. Have a bunch of resources on there too, free resources people can have to do their own personal assessments. Or you can look me up on the socials, LinkedIn or Instagram. My DMs are always open.
Well, hey, we put up the QR code up in the corner too. You can actually book a session with Vin right from there. And if you're listening online, obviously you're not going to be able to do that, but you can maybe go to the YouTube page. I know the majority of our listeners listen, via Spotify or Apple, or on the Believe.com network. Hey, I wanted to ask you this: your website, you built the success, now build the person who can carry it. What happens when someone's professional success grows a little faster than that emotional capacity?
Oh boy, you really want to know?
Yeah.
Oh man, podcast is about to get real negative, but I promise it does. It's not meant to be that way. I've seen it a million times. But go, yeah. What were you gonna say?
No, I said I love it. I want to dive into this. It's a big topic to me.
Okay, so it obviously, the thing I will preface it with is it really determines what it is that you're struggling to carry. Common issues that high performers have is high levels of anger, high levels of ego, and very, very high levels of perfectionism. These are probably the top three most common issues that high performers will hold. And look, before anybody gets, I don't know, is the right word, triggered or feels called out, there is no, when people work with me, this is the number one rule. There's no such thing as good or bad. There just is, and we have to understand what is the reason, because everything you experience has a positive intent behind it. And so before I really go into these, what could happen, I want to just explain this stuff a little bit. Why do so many high performers struggle with these three things? Well, anger is an attempt to feel powerful. When we're struggling with anger, what it really means is that most of the time we feel helpless, we feel like we're not being heard, and it usually goes back to something in the childhood, right? Maybe you were bullied. Maybe your dad was really, really rough on you and said, like, you're nothing. Maybe you never felt good enough, so you always excelled at everything you did. And, when people didn't recognize your efforts, you would get angry. And what you learned is that anger is the only way you're going to get what you want out of life. And so because that became the learned pattern, it's now become your most helpful tool. But see, why I talk about you've built the success, be the person that could carry it, is because there are still guys that are running very, very big successful companies that are dealing with their anger. And then they're at a certain point where the board meetings aren't going well, or they're struggling with their co-founder, or they just blew up on their biggest client. And it doesn't mean you can't be successful with these things. It just means you're going to hit a cap. And as Brian asked, the question is, what happens when you hit the cap? Well, you could lose your company. Maybe the board wants to remove you as a CEO because you're too explosive. I've seen it ruin marriages where the husband has high expectations of his wife, or he's not present for his kids because of the fact that he's too focused on his company. And, there's just no capacity left for them. I've seen, especially in these perfectionism issues where people will spend all of their time in their business and just, they neglect their health. They get out of shape. They get fat. They don't have friends anymore. They don't know what their hobbies are. And by the time they're ready to exit their company, most of them are also ready to commit suicide. Because as you go to exit your company and you've put your whole identity, you sacrificed your health, your family, your happiness, your friendships, you've got nothing. You sold your company. You now have $200 million liquid, but you're fat, you're alone, you have no kids that you maybe wanted, and your wife left you. What's the point of all of it? And you realize there was none. And so I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I'm talking about the stuff I've just seen and experienced, the people I've worked with. You're talking people off ledges. You're seeing that their life is empty and miserable. And that's what winds up happening. You could hit external success. You could build a big company. You could sell it for a lot. But what will you have after all of that? And if you're operating out of, as I said before, that lower level fuel source, and you never learn to switch it, those things are usually the results of not changing the fuel your car is running on.
Okay, so now let's kind of shift a little bit into the focusing on how to get help if you need it, right?
Call
therapy, exactly, right? Therapy, mentoring, and coaching, right? What's the difference for somebody that might be looking and might think, hey, therapy sometimes has a bad connotation. Mentoring is probably misunderstood, and coaching Some people don't even understand what that means. So how would you kind of define or kind of label those three?
So my hybrid methodology is, it's the bridge of all three. I think that all of them have their own use case. I've found through my years of experience that in therapy, a lot of the problem with it is it's purely exploratory. But that's one of the best things therapy is good for. Therapy is about awareness. Therapy is about helping people look at their past and understand why they are the way they are in their present. And I think that's fundamentally important for actually creating transformation and change. But the problem most people encounter, especially if you're a high performer, is when you go to therapy, you're just sitting there talking about your past. And they're just going to ask you about things that you really probably don't even want to keep talking about, but they like force you to kind of always revisit the same thing. And so therapy gets a lot of people feeling stuck, especially high performers. So then you say, well, maybe I need a mentor. Well, what is mentorship anyway? I found that mentorship, even from mentors that I've had, is typically somebody who's sharing with you experience, knowledge, and skills. They'll say, hey, you have this issue. I hit this issue. Here's what I did to overcome it. Or, what I might do in your situation is this, because I've seen it help somebody, or it's helped me, or whatever the case may be. But the problem with mentorship is that mentorship fundamentally lacks some component of awareness, because they're not really there trying to be aware of like what your shortcomings are, or why you are the way they are. And they don't typically give you an action plan. I've had mentors before that will say, well, this is what I think about your situation. Let me know what you plan to do about it, and we'll hop on another call. And I'm like, well, it'd be really helpful if you could maybe give me some tips. And so mentors aren't really equipped to always give you the best advice either, but they can give you spectacular experience and advice if it's applied right. And then lastly is the coaching component. Coaching is all about action. There isn't very much awareness, and usually there isn't very much education around that. It's like, hey, here's where you want to go. Here's who you want to become. How do you plan to get there? Let's build the plan. But most of the people don't realize is you're going to coaching. They're going to advise you and give you a plan. And you're probably going to be super motivated because you just made this investment. It's new and it's exciting. You're with your coach and they promised you you're going to take over the world and make $100 trillion and build the next big business. And you're in it, man. You're like, hell yeah. And things are going great for the first 2 weeks. 3 weeks, you're still hitting progress. Things slow. By week 4, you're probably back to the exact same rhythm. And now your coach is just sitting there with you like, I guess you don't want it bad enough. But the problem was never that you didn't want it bad enough. The problem was you weren't aware of the fact that you were attempting to break years and years of patterns with an action plan you implemented with zero awareness of why your patterns are there in the first place. So this is what I've looked at, and I've seen the benefits and I've seen the problems of it. And that's why I created my hybrid. It's therapy, mentoring, coaching, or as I like to call it, awareness, education, and action. And if you do that, you can actually get real life-changing results without the shortcomings of the individual modalities.
That's a phenomenal way to look at it. Phenomenal. And I mean, you said the mentoring piece, that really kind of struck a chord, because I think of some of my mentors that I've had, and it's true. They're not giving me advice necessarily, but they're kind of showing me the way. They're kind of opening my mind up to different thoughts and so forth. So that really struck home a lot. You mentioned, we talked about a little bit earlier, some founders and executives. Like I said, a lot of people that listen to the show are general managers and coaches and business owners and so on and so forth. So I wanted to kind of throw this question out to you, because I think very relative, and you've already started talking about it, that for those individuals, high performing individuals, sometimes, they think apparent business problems actually maybe are a personal pattern, right? Mm-hmm. Fear, insecurity, avoidance, trust. How often do you see that it's that way as opposed to the actual like business problem?
99.99% of the time. Most business problems are personal problems in disguise. And being a high performer, and that's why I like to say, even though I work with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, I like to say I work with high performers, because being a high performer doesn't have to mean you own a business. One of my clients is an analyst at Citadel, which is one of the biggest hedge funds in the world. And he came to me because he's like, look, dude, I'm 23. I'm already an analyst at Citadel. Like the guy, a first year analyst at Citadel is already making over 300,000 a year with bonus commission, right? Guy, he's like, hey man, I'm 23. I want to just start figuring shit out. Like, how do I become better? And that right there is a high performer. He's not a C-suite executive, but I tell you what, he thinks at the same caliber. And I think that's something that's important to recognize too. You don't have to be an entrepreneur to be a high performer. It's about how you approach life. And so high performers can always hit these issues. Like he was looking at, how do I move up in the ranks? And I was like, well, how do you, and I taught him about how you move up in the ranks, which a lot of people think is just hard work. It's not, it's actually exposure. So how do you get exposure to people? How do you communicate with people? How do you connect with people? And I was teaching him a lot of these things about how he could connect with others better, which he was very bad at. And in his quarterly review, one of the biggest things that he was told was that a lot of people reported about him that he asked the best questions and that he knows how to basically change people's days around, which was a phenomenal testament to his work as a high performer. And then that made him stand out in his company. And now he's responsible for training, 4 of the new junior people that they're onboarding, and he's starting to move up already. And that's something that could be done. But that right there, that was a personal issue that was impacting his capability to grow into the business.
Interesting. Fascinating. Okay. I'm going to shift a little bit because I know you have a podcast as well.
I do.
And called Marked.
Yes.
And explores founder stories, mental performance. It are some of the big topics. Are there conversations that you want to bring into the open through your platform? Is there something specifically that you would want people to know about, stuff like that? Because I think this is important.
It's a yes and no. I just wrote a post today on LinkedIn about one thing my mentor told me, and I've always loved it. I built a whole life around it. Is my mentor always told me that relationships are rocket ships. And so I started building my life around, building relationships. But through the podcast, similarly, I get to build great relationships, but I also get to showcase people's stories. I get to learn a lot about life and business. And I think that's one of the coolest things that we could do is like get information out there. Like if you want to make your kids successful, don't leave them $100 million, leave them a good library of books that taught you the skills of how you grew your life, or skills that they could grow their life with. And, then they could generate their own 100 million. They don't need your trust fund. And so
I heard Shaq, so not to interrupt you, but I heard Shaq talking about that exact thing with his kids, that, hey, I'm going to make sure my kids have money, but they're not going to have all my money. They got to earn it. And I thought that was like, wow, it just kind of seemed pretty profound to me, because I think a lot of siblings that might, come from wealth think it's kind of a given right that they take it over and do it because mom and dad or grandfather built it that way, and can cause some problems.
Well, and you're not wrong. I think there's like part of what I want to have one day as my biggest flex is people, calling my daughter spoiled and saying she gets to do what she does because she has dad's money, which is fine, right? I still want her to figure out her own way to do things, but there is something to be said about the fact that if you create something worthwhile, your kids have access. And your kids having access is really powerful. I know this one dude who's son of a billionaire, and at 23 years old, he's starting his own family office, which no 23-year-old could start a family office without their parents' help, right? Or I know this other kid who has he's 21. He's like one of the youngest people, and he's got a nonprofit and a partnership with the UN. And, I'm like wondering, how the hell does this kid do it? And then you find out, like he grew up with a really powerful family, and like he's doing this because there's extra money that he could kind of live off of while he figures out how to make a nonprofit built. Or this other dude who's made tons of connections and started his own venture fund, and then you figure out like, oh, his mom is this really high level CEO at this really big company, and she's very well known in the world, and that's where he got his connections. But you know what, I used to be jealous of those things, But now I'm like, I want to be one of those parents that could give that kind of access to my kid. And as long as they're doing something, I'm going to freaking move heaven and hell to help them make it possible.
That's awesome. All right. Hey, we're gonna take one last shift, and we are going to go into what I call the rapid fire round. So I'm going to give you a question. Give me a short, sweet answer, and we'll wrap through these five questions.
Okay.
All right. For the rapid fire round, what is one daily habit that helps protect your mental health?
The gym.
Awesome. Me too. I'm going to do this a little bit later. What matters most under pressure? Confidence, preparation, or emotional control?
Oh, emotional control.
How about one phrase about mental toughness that you would happily retire?
That would happily retire?
Yes.
Like get rid of?
Yes.
Oh, mindset is everything.
Yeah. Therapy, coaching, or mentoring, which one do most successful people wait too long to pursue?
All of them.
That's a true one. I would agree, especially after your earlier question. And then finish this sentence. Real resilience is...
Real resilience is... Damn, that's a hard one. Real resilience is how you choose to look at things.
That's a really good one. I actually like that better than what I'd originally thought of. Hey, so, okay. Where can people find, more about you and what you're doing, and listen to the Mark and explore resources? How can somebody get a hold of all that? And I'll put the QR code back up on the screen.
Perfect. Yeah. Best place. Everything is conglomerated on my website. You can find all my free resources. You could click into any social media that you enjoy. My podcast is featured on there. My other lifestyle/event company that I have that host founders, entrepreneurs, and investors in New York is on there. You could find everything about me on my website. It's www.vincentinfante.life. So it's my first name and last name spelled out.
Man, I love it. Vin, this is thanks for being open. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I always appreciate when I have guests on, and the reality behind all you've done, like pressure, the setbacks. I mean, the early stories as a childhood to what you're doing right now. That's growth that people rarely get to see in a kind of a real world, and somebody actually mentioning it. So to everyone listening, wherever you are right now, remember this: a difficult season does not need to define your future. One setback does not erase your progress, and asking for help doesn't make you weak. It actually, might be the strongest decision you could ever make. Hey, keep showing up, keep moving forward, keep believing that better days, stronger habits, a healthier version of yourself are ahead of you, and you can become the best version of yourself. Hey, make sure that you subscribe. You can catch every episode of Just a Cup on the Believe Network, Apple, Spotify, wherever you find those things. You can also watch full conversations, on the YouTube channel. Just search Just a Cup. And until next time, take care of your mind, trust your work, and you're doing, something you'll never forget. You are stronger than what you're facing. I can absolutely promise you that. Next time, Just a Cup. Have a great one.